The room went silent the moment Freddie Mercury hit the floor. 1 second. He was standing, laughing, talking, alive with his usual spark. The next, his body gave out without warning, crashing into the cold ground as those around him froze in disbelief. Panic followed instantly. Voices shouted his name. Someone screamed for a doctor. Freddie Mercury, the man who seemed unstoppable on stage, lay unconscious, motionless, while a medic rushed in, heart pounding, already fearing the worst. But what the doctor would discover moments later wasn't just alarming. It was a truth Freddie had been avoiding, a warning his body had been trying to give him for far longer than anyone realized. Before this story ends, you'll learn what caused Freddie to collapse, what the medical examination revealed, and how this moment forced him to confront something that would change the rest of his life. This is one of the most frightening and revealing moments in Freddie Mercury's story, and it shows that even legends are not immune to the limits of the human body. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Freddie Mercury. It happened without warning. One moment. Freddie Mercury was standing in a quiet lounge just off the rehearsal space, laughing softly as he adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. The room smelled faintly of coffee and warm equipment. The day had been long, but familiar. Rehearsals, planning, voices echoing down corridors he knew by heart. Then the world tilted. Freddie felt at first as a sudden lightness in his chest, as if the air had thinned without permission. His vision blurred at the edges, colors smearing together unnaturally. He reached instinctively for the back of a chair, intending to steady himself, to laugh it off like every other moment of strain he had ignored. He didn't make it. His knees buckled, and before anyone could react, Freddie Mercury collapsed hard onto the floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground was sharp, final, a sound that sucked the breath out of the room. Freddie! Chairs scraped violently as people jumped to their feet. Someone dropped a cup. Another voice shouted for help. Brian May was across the room in seconds, kneeling beside him, his hands hovering helplessly over Freddie's still form. "Freddie, can you hear me?" Brian asked urgently. Freddie didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his face pale in a way that no stage light could excuse. The man who commanded arenas now lay silent, unnervingly fragile, his chest rising only faintly. Panic spread like wildfire. Call a doctor. Get him on his side. Don't move him. A medic rushed in, pushing through the growing circle of stunned faces. She dropped to her knees beside Freddie, already checking his pulse, her expression tightening with professional alarm. "Clear the room," she said sharply. "Now!" Freddie's pulse was there, rapid, uneven. His skin was cool to the touch, damp with sweat that hadn't been there moments earlier. The medic tilted his head gently, checking his airway, shining a small light into his eyes. No response. Brian swallowed hard. He had seen Freddie exhausted before. He had seen him injured. But this was different. This wasn't flamboyant recklessness or creative intensity. This was his body shutting down. "Has he complained of dizziness?" the medic asked quickly. Brian hesitated. He doesn't complain. That answer said more than any medical chart ever could. The medic nodded grimly. "Get me a stretcher. We're taking him in." As Freddie was carefully lifted, his head lolled slightly to one side. For just a moment, his eyelids fluttered, a faint groan escaping his throat. Enough to send a wave of relief through the room, quickly replaced by deeper fear. "Freddie," Brian whispered, leaning close. "Stay with us." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and clipped voices. Freddie drifted in and out of shallow consciousness, fragments of sound breaking through the fog. His name, instructions, the rhythmic beat of a monitor. Inside his mind, everything felt distant, muffled, as if he were sinking underwater. He wasn't afraid. He was tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion he could no longer deny. At the hospital, the doors burst open. Freddie was rushed down bright corridors under harsh lights, the scent of antiseptic filling his lungs. Doctors moved efficiently, asking questions, attaching monitors, drawing blood. Blood pressures low. Heart rates irregular. When was the last time he rested? No one answered that last question. Freddie stirred as a doctor leaned over him, voice calm but serious. "Mr. Mercury, can you hear me?" His eyelids twitched. Slowly, with visible effort, Freddie opened his eyes. The ceiling swam above him. "Well," he murmured weakly, "this isn't exactly the after-party I imagined." The doctor allowed a small smile, but it faded quickly as she examined him further. She pressed fingers gently against his wrist, listened to his breathing, studied the lines of strain etched into his face. "You fainted," she said. "Hard." Freddie swallowed. His throat was dry. "I do like dramatic exits," he muttered. "This isn't one," the doctor replied firmly. She glanced at the chart, then back at him. "Freddie, how long have you been ignoring these symptoms?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched. "How long have you been dizzy?" she pressed. "How long have you been exhausted? How long have you been pushing past warning signs?" Freddie looked away, jaw tightening. "That's not really my style," he said softly, listening to warnings. The doctor exhaled slowly. She had seen this before, not in rock stars, but in people who believed they were stronger than limits. She turned the chart toward him. "Your body didn't collapse randomly," she said. "It stopped you." Freddie's humor faded. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. The doctor met his gaze directly. "I mean, this wasn't just fainting," she said. "This was prolonged stress, exhaustion, and something deeper that your body has been compensating for until it couldn't anymore." Brian stepped closer, heart pounding. "Is it going to be okay?" The doctor paused, just long enough to be unsettling. "He will be," she said carefully, "if he listens now." Freddie closed his eyes, listening. It was something he had avoided his entire life. Drowning discomfort in music, fatigue in applause, fear in performance. And now, lying still beneath sterile lights, unable to charm or sing his way out, he felt something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. The doctor continued, her voice lower now. "There's something in your tests," she said. "Something we didn't expect." Freddie opened his eyes again. "What kind of something?" he asked. The doctor hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but gravity. "The kind that explains why this happened," she said, "and why it can't be ignored anymore." The room felt suddenly very quiet. Brian's breath caught. Freddie stared at the ceiling, pulse steady but heavy, understanding before the words were spoken that this collapse wasn't the end of a bad day. It was the beginning of a truth he could no longer outrun. And whatever the doctor had found would change everything. The room smelled of antiseptic and quiet urgency. Freddie Mercury lay still beneath thin hospital sheets, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor marking time away that felt both reassuring and cruel. The collapse replayed in fragments behind his closed eyes. The sudden lightness, the floor rushing up, the sound of panic where laughter had been moments before. This time, he couldn't joke it away. A nurse adjusted the Ford his arm while the doctor studied a clipboard, her expression composed but unmistakably serious. Brian stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed tightly, as if bracing himself for impact. "Mr. Mercury," the doctor said gently, "we've reviewed your initial tests." Freddie opened his eyes slowly. "I take it you didn't find a hidden trampoline under the floor," he replied weakly. The doctor gave him a small, sympathetic smile, then let it fade. "No," she said. "What we found explains why you collapsed." The room seemed to grow smaller. Freddie shifted slightly, suddenly very aware of his own body, how heavy it felt, how foreign. "All right," he said quietly. "Tell me." The doctor stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're severely depleted," she began. "Your body has been running on reserves for far too long." Brian frowned. "Depleted how?" "Electrolytes. Nutrients. Rest," she replied. "Your blood work shows chronic exhaustion, dehydration, and signs of prolonged physical stress." Freddie stared at the ceiling. None of that surprised him. "I tour," he said simply. "I work." "You survive," the doctor corrected. "Barely." She turned the clipboard toward him, pointing to several readings. "These levels don't happen overnight," she continued. "They build up when someone ignores warning signs, dizziness, weakness, irregular heartbeat." Brian's jaw tightened. "He's been pushing nonstop," he said quietly. The doctor nodded. and his body finally refused to cooperate. Freddie closed his eyes again. He thought of late nights, endless rehearsals, after parties that bled into mornings, performances fueled by adrenaline instead of sleep. He had always believed momentum would carry him through anything. Apparently, momentum had limits. "There's more," the doctor said. Freddie opened his eyes. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, then continued, "You experienced a brief cardiac arrhythmia." The word landed heavily in the room. Brian's breath caught. "His heart?" "Yes," she said. "It slipped out of rhythm long enough to deprive his brain of oxygen. That's what caused collapse." Freddie felt a cold sensation spread through his chest. Not pain, but realization. "My heart betrayed me," he murmured. "No," the doctor replied firmly. "Your heart warned you." She leaned closer, her tone both professional and compassionate. "This isn't a heart attack, but it is a red flag. A very loud one." Freddie swallowed hard. He had always thought himself as indestructible. Not invincible, perhaps, but endlessly resilient. His voice had carried him through illness, heartbreak, exhaustion. He had trusted it to carry him through this too. But voices don't regulate heartbeats. "What happens now?" Freddie asked quietly. The doctor straightened. "Now you stop." The word echoed. "Stop what?" Freddie asked. "Touring," she replied. "Pushing. Ignoring your limits. You rest. You undergo further testing. And you make changes." Brian exhaled sharply. "If he doesn't?" The doctor's gaze didn't waver. "Then next time, he might not wake up on the floor." Silence fell like a weight. Freddie felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not panic, but fear sharpened by clarity. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't distant. This was immediate. For the first time, the idea of mortality wasn't poetic. It was practical. A nurse entered quietly with fresh paperwork. Freddie barely noticed. His mind raced backward through his life. Moments he had brushed past, warnings disguised as fatigue known only to him. The doctor softened her tone. "Freddie," she said, "your body has been extraordinary. But even extraordinary bodies need care." He nodded slowly. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. Brian stepped forward then, placing a hand gently on Freddie's shoulder. "You don't have to figure it out alone." Freddie looked at him, really looked, and felt the truth of it settle. Later, alone in the room, Freddie stared out the window at the city beyond. Traffic moved on. People lived entire lives without stages, without spotlights, without believing they were immune to consequences. For the first time, he wondered what his life looked like without constant motion. It frightened him more than the diagnosis. A nurse returned, adjusting his monitor. "You gave us quite a scare," she said kindly. Freddie smiled faintly. "I have a flair for drama." She met his eyes. "Try staying alive instead." That night, sleep came in short, restless waves. When Freddie drifted off, dreams blurred into memories. Crowds cheering, lights flashing, music swelling. Then faded into silence. When he woke again, the doctor was waiting. "We need to run more tests tomorrow," she said. "There's one more thing we need to rule out." Freddie's pulse quickened. "Rule out what?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Underlying conditions," she said. "Things that could make this more serious than exhaustion alone." Freddie nodded slowly, bracing himself. As the doctor left the room, Freddie lay back against the pillow, heart beating steadily now, but louder in his awareness than ever before. The collapse had been terrifying. The diagnosis was sobering. But what came next, what the next test might reveal, carried a weight he could feel settling deep in his bones. Because if this was only the beginning of the truth, then Freddie Mercury was about to face something far bigger than fatigue. And nothing, not fame, not talent, not defiance, could sing him out of it. The hospital felt different at dawn. Freddie Mercury lay awake as pale morning light crept across the walls, illuminating the quiet machinery that had kept him company through the night. Each beep of the monitor felt louder now, no longer background noise, but a reminder that his body was being watched, measured, tracked, no longer trusted to simply carry on. He hated that feeling. A nurse entered softly, drawing blood with practiced ease. Freddie barely flinched. He had endured worse pain on stage without blinking, but this was different. This wasn't pain he could perform through. This was uncertainty. Brian arrived shortly after, carrying coffee neither of them would drink. He sat beside the bed without speaking, the silence between them heavy but familiar. "They're running more tests," Brian said finally. "Heart imaging, neurological scans." Freddie nodded slowly. "I feel like a car someone finally decided to open the hood on." Brian smiled faintly, then grew serious again. "You scared us." Freddie looked away. "I didn't mean to." "That's the problem," Brian replied quietly. "You never mean to." The doctor returned mid-morning, joined by a cardiologist whose calm demeanor did little to ease the tension. Freddie straightened instinctively, bracing himself. "We've reviewed your additional results," the cardiologist said, pulling a chair closer. "And there's something important we need to discuss." Freddie's pulse quickened despite the monitor's steady reassurance. "Your heart rhythm irregularity wasn't isolated," the doctor continued. "It's been happening intermittently for some time." "How long?" Freddie asked. The cardiologist hesitated. "Months, possibly longer." The words landed hard. Freddie felt a chill spread through him, not fear yet but realization. He thought of the moments he'd brushed off, sudden fatigue, shortness of breath, the occasional dizziness he laughed away backstage. "How did I notice?" he asked quietly. "You did," the doctor replied gently. "You just didn't listen." Brian's jaw tightened. The cardiologist continued. "There's also evidence of chronic strain on your system, not just physical. Stress plays a significant role here." Freddie let out a dry laugh. "You're telling me my lifestyle is intense." The doctor didn't smile. "I'm telling you your body has been compensating for an unsustainable life." The room fell quiet. Freddie stared at his hands. Hands that had played piano in front of millions. Hands that now trembled ever so slightly beneath the sheets. "What happens if I don't change?" he asked. The cardiologist didn't soften the answer. "Then these episodes will become more frequent, more severe, and eventually irreversible." The word echoed. Irreversible. Freddie closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't fight the weight of the truth. He let it settle, heavy, undeniable. "I don't know how to live slowly," he admitted. "I don't know who I am without motion." Brian leaned forward. "You don't have to know today." The doctor nodded. "But you do have to start today." They outlined the plan. Rest, monitoring, reduce travel, cancel performances. Words that felt like amputations to a man whose identity was movement, sound, connection. Freddie listened without interruption. After the doctors left, silence returned. Freddie stared out the window again, watching the city wake up. People hurried to work. Lives continued. No one knew a legend lay in a hospital bed, questioning the foundation of his existence. "I thought I had time," Freddie said softly. Brian followed his gaze. "We all do, until we don't." That afternoon, Freddie was wheeled through a quiet corridor for imaging scans. The machine hummed around him, mechanical and indifferent. Lying there, unable to move, he felt something he had avoided his entire life. Stillness. It terrified him. In the solitude of the scanning room, his mind drifted. Not to applause, not to stages, but to moments he had rushed through. Conversations postponed. Rest denied. Warnings ignored. What if this collapse wasn't failure? What if it was an intervention? Later, back in his room, a nurse adjusted his four. "You're lucky," she said gently. "Many people don't get a warning like this." Freddie swallowed. "Lucky isn't how it feels." She smiled softly. "It never does at first." That night, sleep came more easily, not because the fear had gone, but because exhaustion finally demanded surrender. When Freddie dreamed, it wasn't a crowd's. It was a silence, vast and unsettling. He woke just before midnight to the sound of footsteps. The cardiologist stood at the foot of the bed, chart in hand. "There's one more thing," he said carefully. Freddie's chest tightened. "I thought we'd covered everything." The doctor hesitated, the kind of hesitation that carried weight. "There's an abnormal marker in your results," he said. "It doesn't confirm anything on its own, but combined with your symptoms." Freddie held his breath. We need to investigate further, the doctor continued. It could be nothing, or it could be something that explains why your body is struggling more than expected. Freddie stared at him. Something like, what? The doctor met his gaze steadily. Something systemic, he said. Something you may have been carrying without knowing. The room felt suddenly very small. Freddie nodded once. When do we find out? Soon, the doctor replied. Very soon. After he left, Freddie lay back against a pillow, heart steady but loud in his ears. The collapse had brought him here. The tests had stripped away denial. Now, something else waited, unnamed, unresolved. And deep down, Freddie knew this was no longer just about exhaustion or stress. This was about truth. A truth his body had been whispering for a long time, and had finally screamed loud enough to be heard. Whatever the next discovery would reveal, Freddie Mercury was no longer running. He was listening. The waiting was worse than the fall. Freddie Mercury sat upright in the hospital bed, fingers laced together, staring at a spot on the wall he hadn't moved his eyes from in several minutes. The room was too quiet now. No nurses bustling in and out. No machines humming urgently. Just silence, the kind that pressed inward, demanding attention. Brian stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city below without seeing it. Neither of them spoke. Words felt dangerous, like they might summon answers neither was ready to face. When the knock finally came, both men stiffened. The doctor entered slowly this time, not rushed, not distracted. She closed the door behind her. That single, deliberate action told Freddie everything he needed to know. "Freddie," she said gently, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "Thank you for waiting." He nodded once. "I didn't have much choice." She offered a small, sad smile, then opened the folder in her hands. "We've completed the additional tests," she continued, "and we found the underlying cause of your collapse." Brian turned from the window. Freddie felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained steady. "All right," he said. "Tell me." The doctor took a breath. "The irregular heart rhythms, the exhaustion, the fainting, they're not isolated issues," she said. "They're symptoms of a deeper problem." She paused, not for drama, but care. "Your immune system is severely compromised." The words didn't land immediately. Freddie frowned slightly. "Compromised how?" The doctor met his eyes. "It's not functioning the way it should. Your body is struggling to protect itself." Brian swallowed hard. "From what?" The doctor hesitated, then spoke with precision. "From infections, from stress, from recovery itself." Freddie felt an unexpected chill spread through him. "You're saying I'm sick?" "Yes," she replied quietly. "You have been for some time." Silence filled the room again, heavier now, unmistakable. Freddie leaned back slightly, absorbing the words not with panic, but disbelief. He had always associated illness with visible weakness, with symptoms that demanded attention. This had crept in silently, disguising itself as fatigue, as lifestyle, as overwork. "Can it be treated?" he asked. The doctor nodded slowly. "It can be managed, but only if you make immediate, significant changes." Brian leaned forward. "What kind of changes?" The doctor didn't soften it. "You stop touring. You reduce stress. You allow your body to recover instead of punishing it." Freddie closed his eyes. "Stop touring." The words echoed louder than any diagnosis. Music wasn't just his career. It was his oxygen. The stage was where he felt most alive, most himself. To imagine stepping away from it felt like erasing part of his identity. "How long?" Freddie asked quietly. The doctor hesitated. "We don't know yet." Brian's voice cracked slightly. "And if he doesn't?" The doctor met his gaze honestly. "Then episodes like this will become more frequent, more dangerous, and eventually fatal." The word hung in the air. Freddie opened his eyes again. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't crying. He felt oddly calm, the way one does when the truth finally is nowhere left to hide. "I've spent my life outrunning stillness," he said softly, "and now my body's caught me." The doctor nodded. "Your body is asking you to survive." After she left, The room felt emptier than before. Brian sat down heavily. You don't have to decide everything today. Freddie smiled faintly. That's never been my way. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing carefully. The world stayed steady. A small victory. He walked to the mirror on the wall and looked at himself. Not the Freddie Mercury of posters and spotlights, but the man beneath, tired, alive, confronted. What if I lose myself if I stop? He asked quietly. Brian stood beside him. What if you lose yourself if you don't? The question hit harder than any diagnosis. That evening, Freddie requested to be alone. He sat by the window as night fell, city lights flickering on one by one. He thought of every time he had said, just one more show. Every time he had ignored the cost. For the first time, the future felt fragile, not endless, and that fragility gave it weight. When the nurse returned to check his vitals, Freddie asked a question that surprised even himself. If I slowed down, he said, will I still be me? She smiled gently. You might finally meet yourself. Later that night, Freddie lay awake, heart steady but mind racing. He thought of music, not yet written, songs still inside him, moments that didn't require a stage. The diagnosis hadn't ended his life, but it had drawn a line across it. And tomorrow, he would have to decide which side of that line he was willing to live on. Because the next choice Freddie Mercury made would define not how loudly he lived, but how long. Freddie Mercury left the hospital quietly. No photographers waited outside. No headlines followed him home that night. The world kept moving, unaware that something fundamental had shifted inside one of its loudest voices. The city lights blurred past car window as Freddie sat in silence, fingers resting loosely against his knee, feeling the unfamiliar weight of restraint. For the first time in his life, he wasn't rushing toward the next moment. He was listening to it. At home, the door closed behind him with a soft finality. The familiar rooms greeted him. The piano in the corner, the silence he usually filled with sound. Freddie stood there for a long moment, breathing, letting the stillness settle instead of fighting it. The diagnosis echoed in his mind. Compromised, fragile, finite. He moved slowly to the piano and sat down, placing his hands on the keys without pressing them. For years, music had been his escape, his armor. Tonight, it felt like a conversation he wasn't ready to start yet. Instead, Freddie leaned back and closed his eyes. He thought about the collapse, the floor rushing up, the sudden loss of control. How frightening it had been. How humbling. And yet, how honest. His body had forced him to stop pretending he could outrun consequences. For the first time, survival felt intentional. The following days were strange in their quiet. No rehearsals. No travel. No expectations beyond rest. Freddie followed doctor's orders reluctantly at first, sleeping more than he ever had, eating regularly. Saying no. No was a new word for him. Brian visited often. They talked about music, but also about nothing at all. Silence no longer needed to be filled. That, too, was new. One afternoon, Freddie spoke the thought that had been circling him since the hospital. What if slowing down makes me disappear? He asked. Brian didn't answer immediately. Or, he said finally, what if it lets you stay? The question lingered. Weeks passed. Freddie's strength returned slowly, not dramatically, but steadily. The dizziness faded. His heartbeat evened out. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was perspective. Freddie began writing again, not with urgency, not chasing hits. The songs that came were quieter, more deliberate. They spoke of time, vulnerability, defiance without denial. He wasn't writing to conquer anymore. He was writing to understand. The collapse became something people whispered about, then gradually forgot. But Freddie never did. It remained with him as a boundary, a reminder etched deeper than any scar. One evening, alone again, Freddie stood before the mirror. He studied his reflection, thinner, calmer, undeniably human. I'm still here, he said softly, and he meant it differently now. When Freddie eventually returned to the stage, he did so on his own terms. Fewer shows, more intention. The crowd still roared, but Freddie no longer fed on it to survive. he shared instead. Fans noticed something had changed. His presence felt deeper, his pauses more meaningful. His voice, still powerful, carried something extra now. Truth. They didn't know why. They just felt it. Backstage one night, after a show filled not with excess but connection, Freddie sat alone and allowed himself a rare moment of gratitude. Not for fame, not for applause, but for warning. The collapse had not been a punishment. It had been a message, a moment when his body had spoken louder than any crowd ever could, and he had finally listened. Years later, people would remember Freddie Mercury for his voice, his courage, his brilliance. Few would know about that quiet hospital room, the steady beep of a monitor, the doctor's careful words. But that moment mattered, because it was there, on a cold floor, unconscious and vulnerable, that Freddie Mercury chose life not as performance, but as presence. He closed the piano lid gently that night, resting his hand on it for a moment longer than necessary. Not every battle is fought under lights. Not every victory is loud. Some happen in silence, when a legend decides to stay. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Freddie Mercury.